You might be wondering how we know so much about Ben, or why we are still talking about him 1500 years after he lived. Believe it or not, the way we worship Jesus today, the way the church is organised, much of our practices as Christians all stem from this simple man who spent his life trying to work out what it meant to be a Christian in his world. The reason we still know so much about his teaching is that the little book he wrote, his Rule of Life, still exists today and is still really helpful to us even in the 21st century. It's really important to get a bit of language right here. Ben didn't write a list of rules. It's not a collection of things you must do to get life right. Instead, it's more like a measure, something for us to measure our life against, and to help us keep a track of how we're doing as we try to follow Jesus. It helps us get into a rhythm and to develop habits of Christian practice. Ben wrote a rule of life so that he could be really clear about what his mission was. Perhaps you can imagine him reading the story of Jesus riding into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. The crowds were all waving and cheering, but Jesus seems to know exactly what he is riding towards, exactly what his plan is. The crowds want him to defeat the Romans and become their king, but Jesus knows that the crown he will wear will be made of thorns, and that the enemy he will defeat is much greater than the Roman army. It's the good news of Jesus' crucifixion, death and resurrection that Ben is so eager for the world to hear. And it's what motivated him to build his communities and to share his rule. What difference do you think this Lent might make for you? Have you learned something new about yourself, your community, about Jesus? Will Ben's prophetic example change the way that you live as a Christian? If so, why not make a decision to write down your own rule of life? You may want to think personally about how you will try to be more obedient in your listening, in continuing to change, and in persevering joyfully. You will probably want to do the same as a small community, making a note of how obedient listening, continuous conversion, and joyful perseverance will shape your life together. You may even want to discuss how we as a whole church might create a similar rule to live by from this day onwards. Hopefully you can remember the question that Ben started with right at the beginning of Lent. What does it mean to live as a Christian in this society? How can we contribute to making this world reflect God's hospitality, His kingdom, seen in all creation? Perhaps this Lent you have found some answers to that question and feel ready to continue living the mission of Jesus together.